The first morning in my new house felt unreal, almost too cinematic to belong to my life. Sunlight poured through the oversized windows in warm, golden stripes, catching dust motes that floated lazily in the air like glitter. Everything inside still carried the untouched smell of fresh paint, new wood, and possibility. No dents in the walls. No old footsteps in the carpet. No memories clinging to corners like stubborn shadows. Just me, the quiet, and the echo of my own movements. Cardboard boxes were stacked like half-finished monuments to the life I was unpacking slowly, deliberately, with a kind of care I'd never given myself before. My whole world at that moment was a half-assembled dining table, a roll of bubble wrap, and a single chipped coffee mug sitting on the kitchen counter. I lifted it, warm from the freshly brewed coffee inside, and took a long steady sip. For the first time in years, the quiet didn't feel threatening. It didn't feel like the calm before someone else's storm. It felt like mine. Then came the sound, a low, crunching roll across the gravel driveway, shy at first, then unmistakable. Tires. Slowing. Stopping. Right outside my home, the mug froze halfway to my lips. My stomach tightened out of instinct, like an old reflex waking up from hibernation. No one should have been here. I hadn't given my new address to anyone except the realtor, the utilities company, and the delivery guy from the appliance store. And none of them drove this slow, hesitant kind of stop as if the driver believed they already belonged here. I set the mug down carefully, quietly, as if the house itself might shatter from any sudden movement. Then I tapped open the doorbell camera on my phone, and my breath caught. There she was, Sophia, my sister. 13 years of silence condensed into a single image, her stepping out of a silver sedan, sunglasses perched on her head, suitcase wheels skidding through the gravel. She looked older, sure. Sharper edges, darker hair, a different style. But beneath all that, she moved exactly the same, like she expected doors to open themselves, like she expected life, and people, and entire houses to tilt in her direction without question. She didn't look around, didn't hesitate, didn't check if she was welcome. She walked up the path with the same unshakable confidence she had at 17, the kind that always felt like a quiet warning. Don't get in her way, don't question her, don't expect fairness. I knew that walk. I'd grown up stepping aside for it, watching her now, on my screen, walking toward my door in my world after years of pretending I didn't exist. It felt like two timelines crashing into each other. The one I had built with sweat and silence, and the one I'd escaped from in the dead of night long ago. The coffee smell, the sunlight, the clean walls, all of it suddenly felt fragile, like a dream someone was trying to wake me from. I didn't move, I didn't breathe. I just stared at her image on the screen, suitcase trailing behind her like a decoration. After 13 years, the first person to show up at my new life was the ghost I'd worked hardest to outrun. When people talk about childhood homes, they usually describe warmth, laughter, and the smell of something sweet baking in the kitchen. But in my house, the air itself seemed train-conditioned to lean toward one person the moment she entered a room, Sophia. She wasn't loud, not in the obvious way. She didn't throw tantrums, didn't slam doors, didn't scream. She didn't have to. She had a presence that filled the house so completely that everything and everyone naturally shifted to accommodate her. Conversations paused when she sighed. Dinner plans changed if she frowned. Even the dog seemed to look at her first before deciding where to lie down. It wasn't that she demanded attention. It was that the entire house offered it to her automatically, Mom especially. She hovered around Sophia like a satellite caught in her gravity. If Sophia sighed because homework was too much, Mom was suddenly beside her, ready to explain every answer. If she lost a hair tie, Mom stopped mid-phone call to find it. If she got a paper cut, the entire household moved around her injury like it was a medical emergency. Meanwhile, my greatest talent became invisibility. I learned early that the safest place for me was the edges, the corners, the background, the quiet. The house taught me that. It rewarded my silence. The fewer ripples I made, the less likely anyone would blame me for disturbing Sophia's ever-fragile harmony. At first, I thought this was just how families worked. Every house has its golden child, right? Its center of gravity. But as I grew older, small signs showed me that ours was different. More lopsided. More unspoken, like how Sophia could mutter something about being tired, and suddenly chores were redistributed, schedules rearranged, or how she could drop her jacket on the floor and walk away, and somehow I would be the one asked why it was still there. The rules always bent around her comfort, and bent around me when it was time to fix something. No one ever said, Sophia is more important. They didn't need to. The house declared it for them in every decision, every glance, every rearranged plan. I remember plenty of nights when I'd clean up after dinner without being asked, stacking plates quietly so they wouldn't clatter, wiping down counters fast enough to stay out of sight but thorough enough to avoid criticism. Sophia would sit at the table scrolling on her phone, and Mom would be standing behind her, brushing her hair with slow, adoring strokes like she was royalty being prepared for a portrait, and me, I was the extra pair of hands, the one who didn't ask for anything, the one no one worried about because worrying took energy and all energy belonged to Sophia. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't resentment. Not then. I just adapted to the ecosystem I was born into. I played my role because that's what kids do. They learn which version of themselves receives the least punishment and the most survival. My version was small, quiet, careful, a shadow moving through a house that only ever tilted toward one star, and it wasn't me. I didn't realize until much later how much that tilt shaped me, trained me, taught me to shrink myself so naturally that even I didn't notice I was disappearing, but the house noticed. The house always noticed. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, the kind no one would expect to become a turning point. There was no dramatic thunder, no shouting, no cinematic crash. Just a small moment, quiet, forgettable for everyone except me, when the lines of our family shifted, and I saw exactly where I stood. I was 8. Old enough to understand tone, but too young to understand patterns. Sophia and I had been playing in the living room. Not together, of course, just in the same space. She had scattered her puzzle pieces across the carpet, a bright explosion of colors. I had been building something with blocks nearby, focused and proud, imagining it becoming a castle. Then her puzzle piece went missing, one single piece. The corner piece with a bit of blue sky on it. She looked around once, frowned, and said, "It's gone." That was enough. Mom appeared almost instantly. I still don't know how she heard from the kitchen so quickly and knelt beside Sophia with deep concern, as if Sophia had announced she was losing oxygen. "What happened, sweetheart?" "My piece is missing," Sophia murmured, lower lip trembling with the kind of sadness that seemed rehearsed, even back then. "I can't finish it now." Mom inhaled sharply, like a tragedy had unfolded at her feet. Then she turned to me. "Where did you put it?" Her voice wasn't angry. It was worse, certain. Certain that I had done something wrong, whether deliberately or carelessly. I remember freezing mid-block placement, confused. "I didn't take it," I said softly. Not defensively. Just honestly. Mom gave that sigh, the one that meant I was making things difficult. "Sweetie, just give it back. Your sister needs it." Sophia didn't look at me. She just kept her eyes wide and said, like a tiny queen awaiting justice, I remember the feeling more than the words, the feeling of something invisible closing around me, like a door locking. Mom started searching through my blocks, moving them aside like she expected the stolen treasure to appear. She didn't search Sophia's pile. She didn't consider that the piece might simply be under the carpet, or in the couch, or anywhere else puzzle pieces normally go. Only my area, only my belongings, because of course the problem had to come from me. When the piece wasn't found, Mom sighed again and said, "You need to be more careful, okay?" Sophia gets upset easily. And there it was, The sentence that carved the rule into stone. Someone's feelings mattered more. Someone's comfort was the priority. Someone's upset needed fixing even if the fixing came at my expense. The piece turned up later under Sophia's leg the whole time, but by then it didn't matter. The script was written. Mom brushed it off like it was nothing, smiling fondly at Sophia for being so sensitive, while giving me a look that said don't make things harder next time. That was the moment I understood, not consciously, not in words but deeply, instinctively, my role wasn't to be right, or to be heard, or even to be treated fairly. My role was simple: absorb the blame, protect the peace, bend so she didn't have to, and from that day forward, I did, because the house had spoken, and I was only a child learning the rules written for me long before I could read them. If childhood gave me the introduction to my role, then the years that followed became the long, repetitive chapters where the lesson was reinforced again and again. If something went wrong, it was probably my fault, and if it wasn't, it could easily be adjusted so that it became mine. It didn't happen in loud fights or dramatic accusations. It happened quietly as soft rewriting of events, a subtle tilt of perspective, a practiced family habit where explanations were unnecessary because everyone already knew the script. Sophia cried. I must have annoyed her. Sophia was stressed. I must have distracted her. Sophia forgot something. I must have moved it. Sophia struggled. I must have made it harder. And every time the blame slid silently in my direction, I accepted it like it was a normal exchange of air, predictable, everyday, inevitable. It started with small things: a broken pen, a misplaced book, a spilled glass. Anything that created inconvenience somehow traced back to me. At first, I protested. I'd step forward timidly and say, I didn't do it, hoping the truth would be enough. But truth mattered less than keeping the household balanced around Sophia's emotional comfort. After a while, I learned the pattern. Denying it only stretched the moment longer. Admitting it made everything end faster. So I began to take the fastest route. I'm sorry became my reflex, my shield, my shortcut to peace even when I had nothing to be sorry for. But the years didn't just teach me compliance. They taught me something deeper, something heavier: how to internalize blame even when no one said it out loud. If Sophia slammed her door, I'd scan my memory wondering what I had done to upset her. If Mom sighed, I'd check myself first. If Dad's tone shifted, I assumed I had caused it. Responsibility became a weight I carried constantly, even for storms I didn't create. It was like being the emotional janitor of the house, silently cleaning up every spill before anyone slipped on it. Sophia, on the other hand, floated through the years untouched by this kind of self-examination. She had the luxury of fragility. She could break down, lash out, crumble, and somehow emerge softer, comforted, held. Her mistakes were accidents. Mine were character flaws, and the adults reinforced this without meaning to, with phrases like, just let it go. You know she's sensitive. Why would you do that when you know how she is? You should have thought ahead. You're older, act like it. You're younger, understand her. No matter my age, the logic always bent so that I ended up holding more than my share. Over time, I started believing I really was the source of problems, that my presence naturally complicated things, that my needs were burdens, that my feelings were secondary. I was the one who had to adjust, apologize, accommodate. I was the one expected to stretch myself thinner so her comfort could remain untouched. And the worst part, it became so normal that I didn't even notice I was shrinking. The house had trained me well. By the time I reached my teenage years, the blame didn't even need to be assigned. I volunteered for it. If something went wrong, I stepped forward automatically. A reflex. I learned loyalty. A survival technique. I carried faults like they were groceries, arms full, head down, walking carefully so nothing spilled. Looking back now, I wonder how many of those years I spent carrying weights that didn't belong to me. How many moments I apologized for existing. How many times the blame stuck to me simply because no one else wanted to hold it. I carried it because that was my role, because that's what the house taught me, because someone had to, and because no one ever asked whether I was tired. It's strange how something so small, a post, a few words thrown casually into the universe, can unravel an entire system that stood unchallenged for years. You expect big fights or confessions or confrontations to shatter a family dynamic. But sometimes, all it takes is a single, unexpected voice telling the truth in a place where silence used to live. For me, that voice came from Sophia, and those words came from her social media post. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even long. Just a carefully filtered photo of her sitting by the window, soft sunlight hitting her face, looking thoughtful, almost melancholic. Underneath, she wrote a caption that turned my stomach cold the moment I read it. Healing from years of emotional neglect is hard. Growing up feeling invisible breaks something inside you. 2 sentences, that was it, but they detonated like a grenade in the middle of our family. At first, I thought I had read it wrong. Maybe the words meant something else. Maybe she was talking about school, or friends, or some relationship no one knew about. But then I saw the comments pouring in, friends consoling her, classmates telling her she was so strong, relatives sending hearts and prayers, and Sophia replied to every one of them with quiet gratitude, playing the role perfectly. The wounded child. The overlooked one. The survivor. Meanwhile, I sat there staring at my screen, feeling something hot and sick rise in my chest. It wasn't anger at first. It was disbelief, the kind that leaves you blinking, waiting for someone to step in and say, "Wait, that's not the truth." But no one did, because her version of the story spread faster than any reality ever could. Mom found it next. I knew she had because suddenly the house filled with the frantic energy of someone scrambling to undo years of guilt she didn't even know she was supposed to have. She rushed to Sophia's room, voice trembling, apologizing for every imagined sin, every moment she might have overlooked, every second she hadn't hovered enough, and Sophia, with that flawless instinct she'd honed her entire life, melted into her arms like a child seeking refuge. Tears. Soft sniffles. A performance so seamless it might have fooled me too, if I hadn't lived the truth myself. Dad read it that evening, and his silence was worse than Mom's panic. He didn't question it. He didn't ask what she meant. He simply accepted it, as if the idea that Sophia had suffered more than anyone felt natural, logical. No one looked at me. No one wondered how a post about emotional neglect might land on the child who actually grew up in the shadows, carrying the weight of someone else's fragility. No one thought to ask if maybe, just maybe, I had been the invisible one. The blame didn't shift toward me this time. Worse, I vanished completely from the narrative, and that was the moment something inside me cracked, not loudly, not dramatically. Just a clean, straight fracture. For years, I had swallowed blame, softened myself, bent to protect the peace. But seeing Sophia claim the role of the wounded one, the one I had actually lived, felt like someone stealing not just my truth, but my entire childhood. The comments kept piling up, the sympathy grew, and my silence, once expected, suddenly became unbearable, because for the first time, I realized something terrifying. She wasn't just rewriting the story, she was erasing me from it entirely. And the world believed her. Leaving wasn't dramatic. I didn't slam doors, pack bags in a fury, or shout the final truth everyone had ignored for years. If anything, my exit was the quietest act I had ever committed, a natural continuation of the silence I was trained to inhabit. It began with a single thought that echoed louder each day. If this house never noticed me while I lived in it, would it notice if I left? The more I sat with that question, the clearer the answer became, so I started preparing, not with resentment or anger, but with a kind of weary acceptance. I folded my clothes neatly. I took things that were mine, and left everything that felt like an obligation. I didn't leave a note. I didn't owe anyone a speech, or a confession, or a plea to be understood. I had spent my childhood doing the explaining. I was done offering context. When I finally walked out, the house didn't react. No footsteps behind me, no voice calling my name, no one asking why, just the same tilted silence it had always held tilting away from me. That first night away, I felt both weightless and terrified. Freedom isn't always a grand feeling at first. Sometimes it's just the realization that there's no one left to blame you, no one assigning you a role, no one rewriting the script so your needs are cut out of it. The quiet felt foreign, but honest. For the first time, silence belonged to me, back home, though my absence didn't spark confusion or questions, it sparked a narrative, because when a story loses a character who never had dialogue, the writers rewrite the scene without needing to explain the disappearance. Mom told the relatives I needed space. Dad said I was going through a phase. Sophia, predictably, made it about herself. She posted something cryptic online about toxic siblings and finally choosing peace. It got sympathy likes, supportive messages, and comments painting her as the one who had been mistreated, and just like that, the rewrite was complete. In their version, I wasn't someone who left because I had been worn down by years of invisibility and blame. I was someone who abandoned them without reason, someone unstable, someone dramatic. They built a new truth out of convenience, a truth where they were the wounded ones left behind, and I was the problem who walked away. It was the final twist in a lifetime of being misunderstood, except this time, I didn't feel the familiar urge to defend myself. Let them rewrite. Let them shape their story the way they always have, bending reality around their comfort, their image, their chosen victim. The difference now was simple but profound. I wasn't there to absorb the consequences of their version, and something unexpected happened in that space. I realized I didn't need them to understand me. I didn't need validation, or apologies, or recognition. The closure I needed wasn't theirs to give, it came quietly, steadily, from the act of choosing myself after a lifetime of choosing peace for others. My exit was silent, but it was the first time in my life the silence belonged to me, not to the house that taught me how to disappear, and their easy rewrite. Let them keep it, because I finally walked into a story where I wasn't written out, I was the one holding the pen. The world I built didn't begin with a dream, it began with exhaustion. Not the soft kind that settles in after a long day, the sharp, buzzing kind that fills your bones when you spend years bracing for impact. When you spend a lifetime walking the house like it's a minefield, even after you leave, your body doesn't understand that the war is over. So I worked at night, not because it was convenient, or poetic, or inspiring, but because nighttime was the only time the world stopped yelling long enough for me to hear myself think. That rented commercial kitchen became my sanctuary. Fluorescent lights flickered above me like old memories trying to get my attention, but the stainless steel counters were steady, grounded, real. They didn't care who I used to be. They didn't ask questions. They just reflected back the person I was, slowly becoming, someone who didn't have to shrink. I started with the basics. A few sheet trays. A handful of recipes scribbled in my old notebook. Orders so small they barely paid for ingredients. But each one mattered, not because of the money, but because it gave me proof, tiny scraps of evidence that I could build something that didn't rely on anyone else's permission. Night after night, I shaped that world with my hands, measuring, mixing, baking, labeling. Every motion was a quiet declaration. I exist. I create. I matter. There were no witnesses, no one praising me, no one undermining me, just the hum of refrigerators, the warm gusts when I opened the oven door, and the sound of my own breathing finally finding a rhythm that wasn't dictated by fear. And in that isolation, I discovered something I never had growing up: predictability. If I followed a recipe exactly, it worked. If I added 1 tablespoon too many, it changed the result. Errors didn't turn into moral failures. Mistakes didn't become character flaws. The kitchen didn't punish me, twist my words, or decide that I was the villain because someone else cried louder. Numbers don't lie. And for the first time, neither did my life. Slowly, orders grew. One sweet box LED to another. The entire office worker shared my treats with a coworker. A coworker told their manager. A manager emailed asking if I could handle 50 boxes. 50 became 100. Then 200. Success didn't burst into my life like an explosion. It crept in quietly, respectfully, the same way I used to move through my childhood home. Eventually, the kitchen began to feel too small for the life I was shaping. I upgraded equipment, bought sturdier pans, hired someone part-time to help with packing. I didn't celebrate out loud. I didn't announce milestones. I didn't want congratulations. Silence had once been a prison, now it was my power. In the stillness of those nights, with the city asleep and the air filled with the scent of cooling blondies and chocolate, a new version of me took shape, not built from fear, or guilt, or pleasing others, but from effort, consistency, and the belief that I deserved a life not defined by the shadows I came from. The world I built in the night wasn't glamorous or loud, but it was mine, the first thing in my entire life that truly, unmistakably belonged to me. The world I built didn't arrive in some grand burst of inspiration. It didn't come with fireworks or applause or the cinematic clarity people like to pretend success always begins with. It arrived in the quietest hours, the hours most people sleep through, when the city softened, and the noise of the day finally loosened its grip. Night welcomed me in a way daylight never had. Daylight belonged to other people. To customers, bosses, traffic, responsibilities, expectations. It belonged to texts I didn't want to answer and memories I never asked for. But night was neutral. Clean. Empty. A blank page no one else had written on yet. That old commercial kitchen I rented by the hour wasn't beautiful. The lights buzzed. The floor smelled faintly of bleach. The metal tables were always cold at first touch. But the moment I stepped inside and closed the heavy door behind me, something inside my chest unlocked. Finally, there was a space where no one interrupted, no one demanded, no one rewrote reality around their feelings. In the beginning, I wasn't building a business. I was building a breathing space. I bought ingredients in small quantities, sometimes only enough for one batch. I lined up measuring spoons like tiny soldiers, determined to get things right even when my hands shook from exhaustion. The first orders came from coworkers, neighbors, and the occasional late-night office manager desperate for something sweet to get through a brutal deadline. And every time someone returned for more, even just one box, it felt like proof that maybe, just maybe, I was capable of creating something good. There was a rhythm to those nights, a soft, steady one, whir of the mixer, clack of the metal tray sliding onto the counter, beep of a timer echoing through the empty space, the soundscape of a life rebuilding itself, one small motion at a time. Mistakes didn't spiral into accusations. Burnt edges didn't become moral failures. A recipe that didn't rise properly wasn't a reason for someone to question my character. In the kitchen, consequences made sense. Adjust, record, improve and try again. There was a strange comfort in the math of it all. How butter changed when it softened. How sugar behaved when caramelized just right. How dough responded to patience. Success wasn't about charm or favoritism or whether someone liked me. It was about precision, effort, consistency. As orders grew, the world I built in those late hours began to feel less like an escape and more like a foundation. I upgraded from a small hand mixer to a heavy-duty one that nearly vibrated the table. I bought bulk flour for the first time and felt oddly emotional lifting the 50-pound bag. Eventually, I hired a quiet college student who respected the hush of the space and didn't pry into the life I'd left behind. Together, under the dim kitchen lights, we shaped something real, and that was the beauty of the night. No expectations, no guilt, no comparisons, just work, just growth, just me finally expanding instead of shrinking. The world I built in the night didn't rescue me all at once, but it gave me the tools to rescue myself, piece by piece, until the life I lived in daylight finally began to resemble something I chose, not something I survived. Buying a home was never part of some grand life plan. I didn't grow up imagining paint colors, open-concept kitchens, or quiet neighborhoods with tree-lined streets. Home had always been a place where I tiptoed, apologized, and learned to shape myself around other people's moods. Stability belonged to other families, the ones in commercials, the ones with group photos on the fireplace mantel. Not us. Not me. So when the idea first surfaced, it barely felt real. A house, for me, owned, not borrowed, mine, not inherited chaos. It sounded like a fantasy too delicate to touch, but as my little nighttime business grew, something in me shifted. I began noticing things I'd ignored for years: the sagging shelf in my tiny studio, the window that never quite closed, the way I had to tuck my mixer under the bed because there wasn't enough counter space. Every limitation whispered the same message: you've outgrown this. And maybe, for the first time, I believed it. I started browsing listings at midnight after finishing batches. It didn't feel like shopping. It felt like tiptoeing into a room I wasn't sure I was allowed to enter. The prices scared me. The thought of committing scared me even more. But each night I found myself looking again, scrolling through photos of places with long hallways, sunlight, quiet corners, places where I imagined hearing my own footsteps without flinching. Then came the listing. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't huge. But something about it felt right. The morning light in the kitchen. The solid front door. The way the living room seemed to breathe. When I toured it, the echo of my steps didn't feel lonely. It felt like potential. Like space. Like permission. Still, signing those papers felt like stepping off a cliff. My hands shook when the pen touched the contract. My pulse hammered in my ears. But beneath the fear was something even stronger. A quiet certainty that this leap was mine to take. The day I received the keys, the house didn't feel like a prize. It felt like a responsibility, one I wasn't sure I deserved. I walked room to room, fingertips brushing the walls, almost waiting for someone to tell me it was all a misunderstanding. But no one did. No one was there to overshadow or question or take credit for my choice. For the first time in my life, the silence inside a home didn't feel like danger. It felt like ownership. I moved in with almost nothing: a folding chair, a box of baking tools, a single lamp. The emptiness wasn't unsettling, it was peaceful. Each room felt like a blank page, waiting for my handwriting, my habits, my life to fill it. I cooked my first meal sitting on the kitchen floor. I slept on a borrowed mattress and woke up to sunlight stretching across the walls like a promise. What I didn't realize then was this: the house wasn't just a leap. It was a decoration, a break in the pattern, a refusal to shrink. A home built not from family expectations, but from my own resilience. Owning that house didn't solve everything, but it became the first physical proof that I was done living in the shadows of other people's choices and ready to create a life shaped entirely by my own. Some days settle into memory so quietly you don't even realize they've altered you until much later. And then there are days that hit like a knot you weren't expecting: sharp, echoing, impossible to ignore. The morning my old life tried to return was exactly that kind of day. It began calmly enough. Early sunlight slanted across the floors of my new house, warming the hardwood, touching the boxes I still hadn't unpacked. I was sipping coffee from the one ceramic mug I owned, letting the silence seep into my bones. It was the kind of peaceful morning I used to dream about during childhood. No footsteps pounding down the hallway, no raised voices, no shifting moods dictating how small I needed to make myself. And then I heard it, the slow crunch of tires on gravel, a sound that didn't belong to delivery trucks or neighbors or anyone with a reason to be there. I frowned, walked to the door but didn't open it yet. Old instincts told me to keep distance first, assess later. I checked the doorbell camera on my phone, expecting maybe a package, maybe someone lost. What I saw instead knocked the air out of me: Sophia, standing in my driveway, dragging a suitcase like she had just arrived at a hotel she pre-booked, 14 years of silence, no calls, no apologies, no acknowledgement that I even existed, and there she was, moving like the place belonged to her. She didn't hesitate, didn't pause, didn't even look around to admire or question. She walked straight toward my front door with that same breezy entitlement she'd perfected since childhood. Behind her, struggling with a larger suitcase, was my mother. My stomach tightened. Memories surged, the kind you don't choose, the kind that come back programmed. Suddenly I was 11 again, being blamed for something I didn't do. 16 again, apologizing for feelings that weren't mine. 20 again, shrinking into corners because their convenience mattered more than my truth. But then the present snapped back into place. The walls around me were mine now, my space, my rules, my life, not a stage for their comfort. I opened the door just 3 inches, enough to show my face, not enough for anyone to wedge a foot inside. Sophia smiled like we were picking up from yesterday. Hey, she said casually. I'm moving in for a bit. Things are complicated right now. My mother added, we thought it would be good for us to be together. As a family. Old training almost kicked in. Step aside, swallow discomfort, make yourself small. But I didn't move. I didn't soften. I didn't rescue. Instead, I reached behind me and picked up the white boundary folder I'd prepared weeks earlier, a folder they didn't know existed, filled with clear expectations, rules, and consequences. Paperwork to replace emotional manipulation. I held it where they could read the cover. For the first time, they looked genuinely unsure. Mom stiffened. Valentina, don't be ridiculous. Family doesn't need paperwork. But I wasn't their old version anymore. I opened the door 2 more inches, just enough to show resolve, not enough for entry, and said quietly, all communication is by email. No drop-ins. No staying here. Not anymore. Their faces flickered confusion, disbelief, a hint of fear, because for the first time, the door of my life wasn't opening automatically for them. I didn't argue. I didn't justify. I simply closed the door with a soft, final click. Outside, gravel shifted under their uncertain steps. Inside, my house exhaled, and so did I. The old life had come knocking, but this time, it didn't get in.